While the weather these days has seemed slightly cool for spring, one blessing has been that all of the first blooms, the lilacs and the apple blossoms, have seemed to last for days and days. I was recently reading through seasonal recipes and came across a few that use lilac flowers. I had bought a little jar of lilac syrup last spring from the historic gardens in Annapolis Royal, and that was the first time that I had heard of anything being made with lilac flowers. My dream pantry is slightly romanticized, which is a surprise to absolutely no one. I would love to have a cabinet full of some of our favorites, the usual things like strawberry jam and pickled beets. But then I would also like to do small batches of really interesting things that I tuck away each season. Things I maybe only do a few small jars of. I really was so inspired by all the different preserves at Tangled Garden. I thought this spring, with the lilacs now in bloom, I would try doing a few things with the lilac flowers. I saw a recipe for lilac sugar, which seemed quite easy and something unique. I also read about lilac honey and using the flowers to make a lilac cordial, all of which sounded so beautiful. After sitting and removing each little flower from the clusters of blooms, however, I may have to reconsider, as it's quite a time-consuming process. I really didn't mind, though, as I made myself a cup of tea and caught up on all of the videos from the Chelsea Flower Show. For the lilac sugar, you simply remove each little flower, being careful not to include any green stem bits, as apparently that will make it quite bitter. Then simply add all the little florets to a jar of sugar. I'm not entirely sure what I'll use it for, likely just to sprinkle on scones or on the tops of shortbread or something. I don't think I would enjoy the bits of petal in a tea or anything else. However, simply having a jar of lilac sugar in my pantry sounds lovely and is reason enough to try my hand at it. This season, aside from everything being in bloom, the first harvest is happening in the gardens. Rhubarb is ready for picking. Nearly every old farmhouse and old home here in Nova Scotia has a rhubarb patch somewhere in the yard. A rhubarb patch, some sort of vegetable garden, laundry on the line, and preserves in the cupboard. It's all part of rural life here in Nova Scotia. So when the rhubarb is up and ready, I like to find as much as I can to process and freeze. I have the tiniest bit of rhubarb in my yard, as most of it was buried under my cold frame unknowingly. But there are so many neighbors and friends who give it away that it's not too hard to come by. A couple of things to remember when harvesting your rhubarb. Gently but firmly pull the stalks in a sort of twist and pull motion from the base. Don't cut them. Pulling them out tells the plant to create more stalks. Cutting doesn't, and it leaves an open wound on the plant, making it more susceptible to disease. Also, trim the leaves off and throw them in the compost. They're toxic. When your rhubarb goes to seed, which at first looks like that speckly head wrapped in leaves, remove that bit. It will allow your plant to continue producing instead of focusing its energy on flowering. Most of what I harvest simply gets rinsed, chopped into 1-inch pieces, and frozen in 2-cup bags. I will use this throughout the year to do rhubarb crumbles and rhubarb custard pies. I also do a small batch of stewed rhubarb when I'm processing it. It's just rhubarb stewed in a bit of sugar with some water. It's sweet, but it's still quite tart. We love it on yogurt in the morning, but could literally eat it by the spoonful. I kept 2 cups aside, mostly the deepest red stalks, as they look the prettiest when baked. And with that, I made 2 small rhubarb crumb coffee cakes. This is a basic coffee cake recipe that can be made as a bundt, in 2 small 6-inch rounds, maybe a springform round, or as large muffins. I prefer it in these 2 loaf pans because I think they make for pretty slices. I had to make this batter by hand as my mixer is awaiting repair. The texture may not be exact, as it's rather daunting trying to cream butter and sugar by hand, but I don't find it made much difference. It's quite simple. You just begin by creaming your butter and sugar. It helps when your butter is very soft. And then you add the eggs one at a time, room temperature so that they incorporate well, mixing well after each one. Then I added the vanilla, and then half of my dry ingredients, which I alternate with Greek yogurt. You could use sour cream, but Greek yogurt works well. And then the remaining other half of the dry ingredients. Just mix after each until it comes together as a nice thick batter. I divide the batter between 2 greased and lined tins, and then I top with a chopped rhubarb. After this, I make the crumb topping. Martha Stewart herself says you can never have too much crumb topping, and I agree. The coffee cake batter is quite dense, so it holds up nicely to the crumble on top. There is nothing worse than when the crumb sinks in the middle of the cake. So while I like to generously add it to the top, I do try to not go overboard. The crumb recipe is essentially 1 part sugar, 1 part butter, 2 parts flour, and a little bit of cinnamon. I prefer my sugar to be 3/4 brown and 1/4 white, but really it's up to you. I just mix everything by hand and crumble it on top. I prefer chunky, crispier crumbles on top, something that adds a nice texture to the cake. I like the bits of red rhubarb because they show pink when it's cooked. Also, the recipe for the crumb topping is sufficient for both of the cakes, with a decent amount left over. So I simply crumble it all out on a sheet pan, pop it into the freezer for a few hours, and then store it in a container for when I want to whip up a quick crumble or to add to the tops of muffins in a pinch. It's really a pretty little coffee cake. I love the way it slices. It reminds me of something you'd see in a coffee shop. Sometimes, if I want to elevate it a little, I'll mix my rhubarb in the batter, do half on the bottom, then sprinkle with some crumble, then batter, and then top with rhubarb and the rest of the crumble. But most of the time, I like it just like this. It's simple and delicious. It was perfect for Sunday morning breakfast. I had a slice with my coffee, a bowl of Greek yogurt with some stewed rhubarb, and a couple sausages. It really was so delicious. I just love the mix of the tart and the sweetness, and I love rhubarb season.